How did four different individuals have absolute control over the most powerful state in the world within 1 year? Let's get into it.
Protect the Emperor, alright? That's 3 emperors we've lost in 12 months, no more!
The year is 68 AD, and the Julio-Claudian dynasty has controlled the Roman Empire for 95 years. The Emperor Nero, the great-great-grandson of Augustus, has ruled for 14. His wife has recently died, possibly in childbirth and possibly at his own hands, or more accurately his feet. And full of either grief or remorse, the young emperor has thrown himself into his controversial chariot racing and acting career. The guy even won every single victory crown at the Olympics, so wow. He's also recently finished the last round of purges and treason trials of his political rivals. The general Vindex stages a rebellion, hoping to replace the emperor with a more suitable candidate. He attempts to get the governor of Hispania, Severus Sulpicius Galba, to allow him to name him emperor, but Galba has not committed to this yet. Regardless, Vindex would face an army loyal to the emperor, led by the general Rufus, at Festonio, and upon facing defeat would commit suicide. However, this would lead to Emperor Nero realising that Galba has the capability to be a rallying point for insurrection. He would declare him an enemy of the state. This had the opposite effect actually, and really helped Galba to make up his mind.
Sure, I'll lose everything, but then
So he decided to revolt after all.
I'll have nothing to lose.
The leader of Nero's Praetorian Guard, Gaius Nymphidius Sabinus, would promise each of them that Galba would pay 7,500 denarii per man, which Galba had actually not agreed to if he would support him. Sabinus would eventually attempt to have himself made the candidate for emperor instead of Galba, which would be taken as an insult to the troops' integrity, and they would promptly kill him.
You're not that guy.
And continued to back the absent Galba on the false promise of the 10 years of pay when he arrived. Following the defection of his bodyguard, Emperor Nero would flee to Ostia, where he would be told by Praetorians who refused to let him board a ship, "Is it really such a dreadful thing to die?" Upon hearing this, he would flee back to Rome. That night, the Emperor Nero would wake up in an abandoned palace and would call for someone to just kill him, but no one was there. The terrified emperor shouted, "Have I neither friend nor foe?" And he would slip out of the palace with help, attempting to reach a safe house owned by a free man. Upon hearing that he'd been declared an enemy of the state, he began attempting to kill himself, screaming, "What an artist dies in me," before getting his secretary to carry out the deed. Soldiers would find them and would attempt to stop the bleeding, but on June the 9th, 68 AD, Emperor Nero was dead. Whilst the name Caesar would live on as a symbol of legitimacy and power, the family was dead, and nobody alive could remember a time before them. The Roman generals were now subordinate to nobody, and now every man in the provinces with a legion or two behind him had a shot at the big job of emperor. Let the battle royale begin. Now the time's come to properly introduce you to Severus Sulpicius Galba, an ageing man from a good family who had had a successful public career and was now reaping his reward by enriching himself through his appointment as the governor of the largest province in Iberia. He was a hunchback who naively believed in the concepts of obedience, loyalty, and the chain of command to a fault. This made him completely against bribes. And due to his age, his affairs were being managed by three men: Titus Vinicus, Cornelius Laco, and Icelus. So the Senate named Galba as emperor, and at that moment he was a very popular ruler. And then he began to rule. He started by killing Spanish governors and their wives and children who were not loyal to him during the month which he remained in Spain to get his affairs in order. On the way to Rome, him and his troops, who were behaving more like conquerors than liberators, would sack settlements that would not immediately hail him as emperor. By doing all this, Galba destroyed his reputation before he even entered the city gates, in what the historian Tacitus describes as a long and bloody march.
Thank you.
Galba.
Has freed us.
Oh, I wouldn't say free. More like under new management.
Upon arriving in Rome, Emperor Galba would attempt to recover all of the money that Nero had wasted by handing out gifts and bribes to various nobles. However, due to Rome's system of patronage, a lot of this money had trickled down into the middle and lower classes and become very difficult to trace. This led to mass confiscations of property by Galba's men, often from completely blameless people. This property was then auctioned off in an attempt to recover some funds. But unsurprisingly, the people of Rome were unwilling to buy. This led to the emperor and his associates acquiring a lot of this inventory dirt cheap, Discontent exploded in the city because of this.
I don't know. I think that's a bit dodgy, mate.
It wasn't a good move. So Galba would completely alienate the upper and middle classes by doing this, and by refusing to restore the free grain allowances that the city was so famous for, he'd assured hatred from the lower classes too. The army hated him because of his extreme ideas relating to discipline, which will be relevant later. And finally, the Praetorian Guard hated him because of his refusal to pay the money that the late Sabinus had promised them to support him. And to be honest, if you've just been made the most powerful man in the world, it might be worth just splashing the cash so that your bodyguards don't hate you, but I guess I'm just old-fashioned like that. So Galba would follow in Nero's footsteps and appoint militarily inexperienced men in command of legions in the provinces, and one of these men being Aulus Vitellius to the Rhine legions, which were considered the strongest in the empire. However, they despised Galba due to his poor treatment of them when he commanded them in the past, and this was the reason supposedly harmless Vitellius had been assigned to them. Not being a disciplinarian at all, Vitellius endeared himself to the men by just being one of the lads really, and by this earned their loyalty, and we'll come back to him. For now, with the ageing and childless emperor in Rome, every nobleman believed that they had the right to be adopted as his heir, a very common practice in Rome, one of these men being Marcus Otho, a man in his late 30s who had been an ally of Galba during his march on Rome. He'd been told by an oracle that he would rule the empire someday. Otho had been a drinking buddy of Nero in his youth, but had been sent to Spain, or pretty much banished so that Nero could steal his wife Pompeia Sabina. He was so confident in his impending adoption that he borrowed vast sums of money in order to bribe the Praetorian Guard to support him. So it was to his dismay when a nobleman named Piso was chosen instead. In blind rage, Otho knew that his only option was to take the position of emperor by force, or his creditors would just kill him anyway. So with his last money, he purchased the services of 23 Praetorian Guards. So after riling up the soldiers, a group of them would mount horses and ride through the city to find Galba, who was attempting to resolve the situation in his royal litter, where they would kill him. Piso would seek refuge at the Temple of the Vestal Virgins, but would be dragged out and killed, and Otho would be given the titles of Caesar and Augustus. But upon reading Galba's correspondences, he discovered that the Rhine legions, who refused to accept the hated Galba as emperor, had revolted on January 1st, and on January 2nd had named Vitellius as emperor.
Ahead.
Otho would try to negotiate, offering to marry Vitellius' daughter, but neither of the two would back down, despite both offering the other money and power. So Otho knew that with what few forces he had, just being a ceremonial army really, he could not hope to fight the veteran Rhine legions. So he called for backup from the Balkan legions to fight Vitellius' generals, called Allianus and Valens, who both hated each other and were pretty much racing to be the first one to Rome. However, some small early victories emboldened Otho, and against the advice of his fighting generals, he would order for battle to be given. It's said that Otho's inexperienced troops did much better than could be expected, but lost the Battle of Bedriacum on the 14th of April. When news of this reached his camp, Otho would give away all of his money, tell his supporters to flee, and on the morning of the 16th of April would stab himself, having been emperor for just under 3 months.
Suicide.
You could ask why he'd do this after such a minor setback, by Roman standards. But Otho just wanted himself to be remembered as the man who died to prevent further bloodshed. And this worked. So Vitellius would march on Rome and would enter the city somewhat modestly, because the victory had been won against fellow Romans and he didn't want to celebrate too much. But he would be named emperor by the Senate. He would not be popular among the people of Rome, reportedly having 3 lavish feasts a day, inviting rivals to the palace with promises of power, just to have them killed, as well as beating and killing moneylenders who asked for their money back. So just 1.5 months after being named, Vitellius would discover that the entire Eastern Empire had declared war on him, and rallied behind their own candidate, Vespasian.
Oh, your half! There is no your half of the money! There is only my all of it, do you understand?
Vespasian was born in 9 AD, and entered public life when he was elected tribune of Thrace aged 19, and here I am making a YouTube video about the guy at 19. He had a successful career, and would end up as the governor of Africa, until during one of Nero's performances, he would forget to pay attention and actually fall asleep and would very much lose royal favour, before being sent to Judea to quell a revolt, due to just being the most capable man for the job.
Yes.
Come on and make my day, Jew.
Similarly to Vitellius and Galba, he'd been named emperor by the Syrian and Judean legions, and would send the general Mucianus with troops to take Rome, while he would secure the important grain sources in Egypt. Troops loyal to him from the Danube legions, under the leadership of Marcus Antoninus Primus, would defeat Vitellius' forces at the Second Battle of Betriacum. Vitellius would desperately try to levy new troops from allied tribes, but they would just refuse. And then, hearing that Rome was being neared by Vespasian's forces, he would attempt to go into hiding, but would make the questionable decision to visit the imperial palace for one last time. On the 20th of December, he would be killed by soldiers, and Vespasian would be named emperor the next day. Vespasian would establish the Flavian dynasty, which would control Rome for almost 30 years. And the reason that many of the Julio-Claudian emperors, except for Augustus, are seen so badly is likely due to their propaganda, to make themselves look better in comparison. But overall, Vespasian is accepted as a relatively good emperor. He was not cruel, he fixed the economy, he had a good sense of humour and established lots of building projects within the city, including the Colosseum during his reign. Then again, the winner does write history. But either way, the Roman Golden Age, known as the Pax Romana, will continue for another century. Thanks for watching.